You keep asking yourself why you always fall for the same kind of person, why it always ends in the same ache, the same confusion, the same quiet emptiness. You blame your heart, you blame your naivety, you tell yourself you just have bad taste. But what if none of that is true? What if it isn't your heart that's broken, but your blueprint? The silent script your nervous system follows without your permission, the one that tells you what love feels like. The one that was written long before you ever went on your first date. You weren't born addicted to chaos. You were conditioned into it. Somewhere along the way, you learned to associate love with emotional tension. You learned to expect love to be earned, not given. So when someone withholds affection, when someone is emotionally unpredictable, it doesn't send you running. It pulls you in, not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. And the human brain, above all else, seeks familiarity, even if it hurts. The truth is, you get addicted to the wrong people not because you don't know better, but because your nervous system does. It recognizes them. There's something about their distance, their inconsistency, their inability to fully choose you that wakes up a very old part of you, a part that was once a child trying to decode emotional signals from a parent who couldn't fully attune. That child is still in you, still hoping that if you just love the right way, give enough, stay loyal enough, the person will change. But they don't, and you stay not because you're foolish, but because leaving would mean letting go of that unconscious hope, the hope that this time will be different, that this time love will finally feel safe inside the storm, that this time the chaos will calm down into peace. But it doesn't, because no matter how much love you pour into someone, they can't give you what they don't have. They can't make you feel secure if they're still fighting their own demons, and you can't fix their emptiness by emptying yourself. This is where addiction enters the story, not in the beginning when things feel magical and intense, but later when it starts to hurt and you still can't walk away, when your brain starts to crave the next hit of validation, the next breadcrumb of affection, the next high after the crash. You're not choosing the wrong person. You're relapsing into the emotional environment your body was trained to survive. That's what Jung meant when he said the unconscious drives our fate. You don't just pick a partner. You recreate emotional patterns that are unresolved. You repeat stories, even painful ones, because repetition gives the illusion of control. If you can survive it again, maybe this time you'll win. Maybe this time the story will end differently. Maybe this time you'll be enough. But here's what makes it worse. The ones you get addicted to, they don't reject you all at once. They give you just enough to keep you hoping. That's what makes it so hard to leave. If someone were cruel all the time, it would be easier to walk away, but they're kind just enough, affectionate just enough, attentive just enough. And those crumbs confuse you. They activate your longing. You remember the good moments and tell yourself that if you just hold on, those moments will return. But they don't. Not consistently, not sustainably. And that inconsistency is the hook. The truth is, the wrong person doesn't show up as a villain, they show up as a fantasy. They mirror your wounds in ways that feel intimate. They trigger your insecurities in ways that feel urgent. They create a bond through your pain, not your peace. And because that bond feels intense, you call it love. But love doesn't make you question your worth. Love doesn't make you feel like you're walking on a tightrope, terrified that one wrong move will make them disappear. Love is not anxiety dressed up as passion. What you're feeling is not romance. It's a nervous system trapped in a cycle of anticipation and disappointment, of highs and lows, of feast and famine, and like any addiction, the withdrawal feels unbearable. That's why even when you know they're wrong for you, you go back. You check their social media, you replay old memories, you fantasize about what could have been. Because the loss isn't just about them, it's about the future you built in your mind, the version of the relationship you hoped would save you. But here's the thing, it's not your fault that you ended up here. You were taught a definition of love that was distorted. Maybe you had a parent who was present but emotionally unpredictable. Maybe you were loved conditionally, only when you behaved, only when you achieved, only when you met someone else's needs. That kind of love trains you to chase, to overfunction, to prove yourself constantly. So now, when someone makes you work for their love, it feels normal. And when someone offers love freely, it feels suspicious, because your template for love is still shaped by survival, not safety. And that's the part that needs healing, not just your heart, but your pattern. The unconscious loop that tells you love should feel like effort, like anxiety, like uncertainty. But love isn't supposed to keep you guessing. It isn't supposed to make you feel disposable. It isn't supposed to make you earn rest or silence or peace. Love doesn't feel like a reward you win. It feels like a home you can return to. Carl Jung believed that every relationship is a mirror, that the people we fall for reflect back the parts of ourselves we've rejected, forgotten, or misunderstood. So when you fall for the wrong person, it's not just about them. It's about what they awaken in you. Maybe they make you feel needed. Maybe they validate your fears. Maybe they reflect the emotional dynamic you had with your parents. Whatever it is, they don't just enter your life, they activate your wounds. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep calling it chemistry. But chemistry without compatibility is a trap. It feels electric at first, but it burns out. And often, the person you feel the strongest chemistry with is the one who triggers your deepest insecurities. You're drawn to them not because they heal you, but because they match your familiar pain. And that's the addiction. That's why you stay. That's why you keep going back, even when it costs your self-esteem, your peace, your identity. You don't need someone who makes you question your sanity. You need someone who makes you feel safe in your skin, who doesn't make you beg for attention, who doesn't weaponize silence, who doesn't disappear the moment you set a boundary. But to receive that kind of love, you have to believe you deserve it. And for that to happen, you have to rewrite your script. And rewriting the script starts with grieving. Not just the person, but the story. The idea that if you'd been better, they would have stayed. That if you'd loved harder, they would have treated you differently. Let that go. Because someone who truly loves you doesn't need to be convinced. They don't make you jump through emotional hoops. They show up, consistently, kindly, without the drama. You were taught that love is sacrifice, that love is struggle. But real love doesn't drain you, it restores you. It doesn't play games, it builds trust. It doesn't manipulate, it communicates. And it doesn't abandon you when you're difficult. It stays and works through the difficulty with you. You're not addicted to the person. You're addicted to the story they fit into. A story where you're finally enough, finally chosen, finally seen. But the truth is, you've always been enough. You just learned to look for love in people who couldn't see it. And that's not your fault, but healing is your responsibility. You didn't fail because you weren't lovable. You didn't lose because you weren't enough. You lost because you were trying to win love from someone who didn't know how to give it. You were trying to find stability in someone who was still at war with themselves. And that's not a failure. It's a heartbreak, a misalignment, a lesson. But here's the hard part. There's a piece of you that still wants to believe it could have worked. That if they'd just gone to therapy, if they'd just been more emotionally mature, if they'd just realized how much you cared. You cling to the almost, the maybe, the what if. That's what keeps you stuck, because letting go feels like giving up on all the love you gave, the time you invested, the pain you endured. It feels like all of it was for nothing. But it wasn't. That love you gave, it wasn't wasted. It was proof. Proof that you're capable of depth, of loyalty, of vulnerability. That you can feel, even after being hurt. That you can hope, even after being disappointed. And that part of you, the part that still believes in love, it doesn't need to be silenced. It needs to be protected. Because when you love like that, it's not weakness, it's courage. But that courage needs to be directed somewhere safe, somewhere worthy. You see, most people think the opposite of addiction is sobriety. But the real opposite of addiction is connection. Real, grounded, mutual connection. And when you've been addicted to the wrong people, you don't just need to stop the cycle. You need to learn how to connect in a way that doesn't require you to lose yourself. You need to find a connection that doesn't cost your mental health. A love that doesn't trigger your fight or flight response. But here's what no one tells you. Healthy love feels weird at first. It feels boring, flat, underwhelming. Not because it is, but because your nervous system is used to the spike, the crash, the adrenaline. So when someone shows up calmly, consistently, you don't trust it. You think they're hiding something. You think the spark is missing. But that's not the spark. That's the absence of anxiety. That's peace, and you've never been taught to crave peace. Carl Jung believed that until you confront your own darkness, you will project it onto others. And that's what happens in these addictive relationships. You project your need to be rescued onto someone who doesn't even know how to save themselves. You project your unresolved wounds onto someone who mirrors them back to you. And then you call it fate. You call it love. But it's just repetition, the same cycle with a new face. And sometimes the hardest part isn't breaking the bond. It's facing what the bond was distracting you from. When you're addicted to someone else's approval, you don't have to deal with your own emptiness. When you're constantly trying to decode their mixed signals, you don't have to sit with your own pain. Their chaos becomes a distraction from your own healing. So when you let them go, all that noise disappears, and you're left with silence. And in that silence, all the buried grief begins to surface. Grief for the time you lost, for the boundaries you ignored, for the dreams you compromised, for the parts of yourself you abandoned to make the relationship work. And that grief, it's heavy, it hurts, but it's also sacred, because you can't heal what you don't grieve. You can't move forward until you admit what it cost you to stay. And make no mistake, it cost you. It cost your peace, your confidence, your trust in your own instincts. That's the other tragedy of these connections. They don't just hurt while you're in them, they leave a residue, a self-doubt, a reluctance to trust again. And you start to wonder if you're the problem, if maybe you expect too much, if maybe love always feels this unstable. But it doesn't. That's just what you've known. You deserve a love that doesn't make you feel like you're too much, or not enough, or too needy, or too quiet. You deserve a love where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to hustle for attention, where you don't have to decode silence or apologize for your needs. And yes, it's hard to believe that when all you've known is conditional affection, but that belief, that deep inner knowing that you are worthy of steady love, that's where everything changes. But you won't find that belief in someone else's eyes. You won't find it in their text messages or in the way they finally say sorry. You'll find it in yourself, in the moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop justifying mistreatment, the moment you stop begging for someone to see you, because you finally see yourself. You see your pain, you see your patterns, and instead of judging them, you hold them with compassion, with tenderness, with honesty. Because the moment you stop asking, why didn't they love me, and start asking, why did I stay when they didn't? That's when you take your power back. That's when the addiction starts to lose its grip. That's when the pattern starts to break. And maybe that's the real gift of the wrong people. Not that they stay, not that they change, but that they show you what needs healing. That they illuminate the parts of you that are still waiting for someone else to save them. That they bring your unconscious wounds to the surface so they can finally be named, felt, and released. Jung said that healing doesn't happen by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And this pain, this ache you carry, it's not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that something deeper is asking to be seen. That little child in you who was never fully chosen, who was always told to shrink, who learned that love must be earned. She's asking to be held, not by someone else, by you. That's the beginning of real freedom. When you realize that healing doesn't come from finding someone who finally treats you right, it comes from becoming someone who no longer tolerates being treated wrong. It comes from knowing your worth so deeply that you no longer confuse inconsistency for passion, chaos for depth, suffering for love. And I know, it's hard, letting go of someone you still love, even if they hurt you, letting go of the fantasy of what could have been, of who you hoped they would become. But you're not just letting go of them. You're letting go of the idea that love has to be painful, that connection has to cost you your peace, that being wanted is the same as being loved. It's not. Being wanted isn't the same as being cherished. Wanting is easy. People want you when you're beautiful, when you're useful, when you soothe their loneliness or validate their ego. But to be cherished, that requires someone who sees your soul, even when you're not performing, even when you're anxious, even when you're messy. Someone who doesn't withdraw when you need reassurance, who doesn't punish you for being human. That's rare. That's love. That's what your nervous system has never been taught to recognize as home. And that's the wound, the core of it. You weren't taught how to rest in love. You were taught how to work for it, to earn it, to prove you're worthy of it. And that's why the wrong person hooks you so deeply. They make you work. They activate that old muscle memory of striving, fixing, convincing. But love is not a project. You are not a rehab center for broken people. You are not responsible for teaching someone how to treat you. Still, I know how hard it is to walk away when your heart's still clinging to hope. There's something cruelly beautiful about the way the wrong people linger in your mind. They show up in songs, in smells, in memories you didn't even know you'd stored. You find yourself checking your phone, even though you swore you wouldn't. You tell yourself it's just one message, one last closure conversation. But it's never just one, because what you're really looking for isn't closure, it's validation. One final affirmation that you mattered, that they cared, that it wasn't all in your head. But the ones who leave you confused, who love you in fragments, who disappear when you need them most, they never give you closure, because they were never truly open in the first place. And you don't get closure from someone who is emotionally unavailable. You get closure from facing the truth that their behavior was never about you, that you were lovable all along, that the story you told yourself that if you were better they would have stayed is a lie. That lie is the addiction, the belief that you are responsible for the way people fail to love you. And that belief keeps you stuck. You start overanalyzing everything, the texts, the tone, the timing. You ask your friends for advice, hoping they'll decode it, but deep down, you already know. You just don't want to admit it. Because admitting it means grieving it. And grief is heavy. But grief is also sacred. It's the price of transformation. When you finally stop running from it, when you sit with it, cry with it, hold space for it, it teaches you. It teaches you how to let go without self-hatred, how to love without losing yourself, how to choose peace over potential. Carl Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And staying addicted to the wrong person is one of those ways. It's a form of avoidance. Because as long as you're obsessed with fixing them, you don't have to fix yourself. As long as you're chasing their love, you don't have to confront your own loneliness. But that avoidance will keep costing you. It will cost you relationships with people who could actually love you. It will cost you years of your life. It will cost you your softness, your trust, your joy. And at some point you have to ask yourself, what am I really chasing? Is it love or is it validation? Is it a future with this person or is it proof that I'm not as unlovable as I fear? And that's the question that shatters the illusion. Because you realize that your fight to stay wasn't really about them. It was about you. About the part of you that still doesn't feel worthy. And that part of you, it doesn't need to keep fighting. It doesn't need to earn anything. It just needs to be met with compassion. Because addiction to the wrong people isn't about weakness, it's about repetition. And repetition is how trauma survives. You keep repeating what hurt you, hoping to win this time. But there's no prize at the end of that loop. Only exhaustion, only heartbreak, only the slow erosion of your self-worth. You deserve more than that. You deserve someone who doesn't make you feel like love is a guessing game. Someone who shows up on the hard days, not just the fun ones. Someone who doesn't make you question your instincts, your memories, your needs. But to attract that kind of love, you have to believe you're worthy of it. And that's where the real work begins. You have to reparent yourself. Teach your body that safety is not boring, that calm is not danger, that love doesn't require anxiety to be real. And that process, it's slow, it's painful, but it's powerful. Because for the first time, you stop searching for someone to complete you. You begin becoming whole on your own. And yes, loneliness will visit. You'll miss the intensity, you'll miss the high. But over time, you'll begin to crave peace more than chaos. You'll begin to choose partners who don't activate your trauma, but who soothe it. And you'll notice something strange. You'll feel bored at first, restless, like something's missing. But what's missing is the adrenaline, the emotional whiplash, the need to perform. And when that absence stops feeling like emptiness and starts feeling like relief, you'll know you're healing. Because healthy love is not a performance. It's not fireworks and suspense. It's quiet safety. It's consistency. It's being seen on your worst day and not being pushed away. It's asking for reassurance and not being made to feel needy. It's setting a boundary and not being punished with silence. But you'll never reach that kind of love if you keep entertaining what wounds you. If you keep mistaking emotional unavailability for mystery. If you keep calling anxiety chemistry. If you keep shrinking yourself to be chosen. Because the right person doesn't need you to shrink. They need you to be whole, present, and you were allowed to want more. Even if you loved them, even if they loved you the only way they knew how, even if there were good moments, wanting more doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. You can love someone and still walk away. You can miss someone and still know they're not meant for you. You can forgive someone and still never let them back into your life. Because forgiveness isn't always reconciliation. Sometimes, forgiveness is saying, I love you, but I love me more. And maybe that's the lesson the wrong person came to teach you. Not how to love them, but how to love yourself. How to say no without guilt. How to trust your gut. How to listen when something feels off. How to stop settling for crumbs when you deserve the feast. You have been dining on crumbs for so long you've started calling them a meal. You've grown used to emotional starvation and called it romance. You've confused unpredictability with excitement, mood swings with depth, and trauma bonds with soulmates. That's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to stop. Because the longer you stay, the more it rewires your sense of normal. It erodes your boundaries quietly, gently, one compromise at a time. You let a red flag pass because you don't want to seem dramatic. You ignore that hollow feeling in your gut because you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. You downplay your own needs because theirs always seem more urgent. And with every silence you swallow, every moment you excuse, every instinct you abandon, you move further from yourself until one day you look in the mirror and can't recognize the person staring back. You used to be bright, open, full of hope. Now, you're cautious, small, always waiting for the next emotional blow. That's not love. That's erosion. Yet you still crave them. And that craving, that magnetic pull, makes you question your own logic. You ask yourself, if they're so wrong for me, why do I still want them? Because addiction doesn't care about logic, it cares about emotion. It cares about what's familiar. And when your body equates love with pain, then pain becomes the language of connection. So you justify their behavior. You romanticize the highs. You tell yourself that every relationship has problems. But deep down, you know, love should not require you to abandon yourself. Love should not come with a side of dread. You should not be constantly decoding texts, managing their moods, or walking on emotional eggshells. Love should feel like a sanctuary, not a test. Still, the withdrawal is brutal, because what you're grieving isn't just a person. You're grieving the version of yourself that believed this time would be different. You're grieving the fantasy, the future that never came. And that grief will tempt you to reach out, to check in, to reopen a door you fought so hard to close. But before you do, ask yourself, do I miss them? Or do I miss how I felt when I was being loved by the version of them I created in my mind? Because the person you keep replaying in your head, the one who was tender, attentive, present, that's not who they were consistently. That's who they were occasionally. And occasional love is not enough. It's like holding onto a balloon with a slow leak. You keep tightening your grip, hoping to make it last, but the air keeps escaping, no matter how hard you try. It deflates in your hands. And maybe the hardest part is realizing you loved them with everything you had, and they still couldn't meet you there. But that doesn't mean you gave too much. It means they were never ready to receive it. And their inability to receive love has nothing to do with your ability to give it. Carl Jung said, "We are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become." And you have a choice. You can continue the cycle, continue chasing unavailable people, continue calling it fate, or you can pause, reflect, heal. You can trace the roots of your addiction and ask yourself, what am I really seeking in these relationships? Is it love, or is it familiarity? Is it connection, or is it a reenactment of old wounds? Because real healing doesn't begin with blame, it begins with responsibility, and responsibility is not self-blame. It's the refusal to abandon yourself again. It's choosing to stay with your pain instead of outsourcing your worth to someone who keeps dropping it. It's recognizing that you don't need another heartbreak to wake up. You can choose to wake up now. And as you heal, you'll begin to notice things. You'll notice how quiet the world becomes when you're no longer addicted to chaos. You'll notice the steady rhythm of your own breath, the clarity of your own voice, the weight of your own presence. You'll stop asking, will they come back? And start asking, do I even want them to? Because when the fog lifts, you'll see the truth. You were never afraid of losing them. You were afraid of what their absence would reveal. But what it reveals is this: you're still here. You're still standing, even after all the tears. Even after all the nights you begged the universe to give you a sign, you are still here. And that means you can begin again. But this time, you begin with you. You stop waiting for someone else to make you feel loved. You stop trying to convince someone to see you. You stop letting your loneliness make decisions on your behalf. You learn to sit with your emptiness without trying to fill it with dysfunction. And slowly, quietly, the addiction fades. Because peace, at first, feels foreign, but eventually, it feels like home. You start craving healthy communication, clear intentions, emotional safety. You stop second-guessing yourself. You start choosing people who make love feel easy, who don't make you guess, who don't vanish when you express a need. And you start protecting your energy like it's sacred, because it is. And no, the old version of love might never fully go away. There will be days you miss the chaos, miss the highs, miss the emotional roller coaster. But you won't miss the crash. You won't miss the confusion. You won't miss the way you had to abandon yourself to keep the connection alive. Because now, you've learned. Love isn't meant to be survived. It's meant to be lived. You're not addicted to them. You're addicted to what you hoped they would become. You're addicted to the dream. But love isn't a dream. It's a reality. And the right love doesn't just feel good when it's convenient. It feels safe, steady, and real, even on the hard days. So stop asking why they couldn't love you right. Start asking why you stayed after they didn't. Because that question, why you stayed, is the beginning of everything. It's where your healing begins and your old self ends. It's where you stop chasing illusions and start facing truths. It's where you realize that the love you were starving for wasn't out there. It was always supposed to begin inside you. That's the tragedy and the liberation in one. No one is coming to fill your emptiness. And yet, that means no one has the power to keep you empty either. You've given away that power over and over. Each time you tolerated disrespect, each time you rationalized mixed signals, each time you believed that being loved less was better than not being loved at all. But not anymore. You're allowed to change your story. You're allowed to outgrow the fantasy. You're allowed to stop romanticizing struggle and start choosing peace. You're allowed to believe that love doesn't have to be complicated to be real. You're allowed to want more, even if they once felt like everything. You don't have to hate them. You don't have to erase the good times. You just have to stop mistaking connection for compatibility. You just have to stop giving your deepest loyalty to someone who only showed up halfway. Because love without commitment isn't security, it's suffering. And affection without consistency isn't intimacy, it's confusion. Carl Jung taught us that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So yes, maybe they were selfish, maybe they were avoidant, maybe they were emotionally chaotic, but your pain is still a mirror. What in you felt safest being hurt? What in you kept believing that being chosen was something to be earned? What in you kept lowering your standards just to keep from being alone? That's where your work lives, not in trying to figure them out, but in figuring yourself out, in seeing how your unmet childhood needs shaped your adult cravings, in seeing how the patterns you thought were fate were actually a map leading you back to the wounds you buried deep. And those wounds, abandonment, shame, rejection, fear, they don't need more punishment. They need gentleness. They need love. They need a home inside you that isn't constantly trying to prove its worth. Because until you give yourself what you're begging from others, you will always be vulnerable to addiction. You will always be at the mercy of someone else's validation. And the wrong people, they can feel that. They sense when you're starving, when your self-esteem is negotiable, when your boundaries are pliable, when you're willing to accept less just to avoid emptiness. That's how the cycle repeats. But that's also where you can break it. You break it by becoming someone who no longer tolerates the bare minimum, who no longer romanticizes inconsistency, who no longer equates chaos with love. You become someone who knows that solitude is not punishment, it's protection, that your worth is not up for debate, that love isn't something you win, it's something that grows when both people show up fully, honestly, consistently. So the next time you feel the urge to chase, pause. Ask yourself, what am I actually craving? Is it their love? Or is it the feeling of finally being seen? Because the most addictive thing in this world is hope. Not the pure kind, the desperate kind, the kind that says, if I just try a little harder, maybe they'll finally choose me. But the truth is, if someone is still unsure about you after you've given your heart, they're not uncertain. They're unavailable, and you deserve more than uncertainty. You deserve reciprocity. And one day that more will come, quietly, softly, without the fireworks, without the confusion. And you might not trust it at first. You might flinch when someone loves you without condition. But slowly you'll realize this is what love was always supposed to be. Not a war, not a chase, not a guessing game, but a place. A steady, honest, sacred place where you are met, not managed. Where you are cherished, not tolerated. Where you are free to be exactly who you are. That kind of love doesn't feel like a rescue. It feels like coming home to yourself. And until that love finds you, you don't have to stay stuck in the cycle. You can choose healing. You can choose peace. You can choose to stand in your own worth, even if you have to do it shaking, even if you miss them, even if it hurts. Because missing them isn't a sign to go back, it's a sign you're human. It's a sign you felt deeply. But your depth doesn't belong in shallow places. Your heart doesn't belong in hands that don't know how to hold it. Your softness doesn't belong in relationships where it's seen as a weakness. You are not hard to love, you are just loving people who can't meet you there. But you can meet yourself. You can be the one who chooses not to abandon yourself again. You can be the one who finally says, I may not have been loved the way I deserved, but I will never again settle for less than I give. And that is where the addiction ends.